Thank you for continuing with us in our journey of exploring the experience of prayer. My lands, we've been through it all. We've um, had a working definition of prayer, the human experience of aligning with the divine. We know it's a universal practice of all major faith movements. We know that a biblical word study reveals that prayer is an umbrella term that includes at least 12 different words in the original languages. We've discovered that the theology of the believer determines how one prays. We've explored private, community, and public prayer and the perils and the promises of prayer. And this week we're looking at the third promise of prayer. That in addition to the promise of prayer, experiencing connection and community, the third fulfilled promise of prayer is change. Simply stated, prayer, seeking to align with the divine, changes the person who prays. Often prayers are offered seeking specific outcomes of human predicaments. Prayer changes things is the theme of many. However, such prayers are often not answered. Things don't change. However, change does occur when the prayer seeks to align with the divine, because prayer changes those who pray. Now, spiritual health is composed of connection with the divine. It's composed of the promise of the community of faith and change. And this third promise of prayer may be the most uncomfortable experience in the life of prayer. Far too often, persons of faith, including Bruce, get mired down and stuck, and we do not change. Often communities of faith, called local churches, they get stuck, revealing what is often referred to as the 7 last words of the church. It's always been done this way before. However, when we consider the history of our Jewish and Christian tradition, change is, to be sure, uncomfortable, but it's also a given in the life of prayer. Let's remember the message of the preachers in the Hebrew library, the prophets in the Old Testament. Uncomfortable, but always calling for change. Let's remember the life and teachings of Jesus. Uncomfortable, but calling for growth and change. Let us remember the protesting movement, the Protestant movement. Uncomfortable, but calling for growth and change. Let's remember the Wesleyan movement. Uncomfortable, but calling for change. And today, the separation within the United Methodist Church, it's uncomfortable, but it's calling forth change. You see, change is a given for persons who pray, seeking to align ourselves with the divine. Oh, to be sure, it would be more comfortable to remain where we are. But a promise of prayer is that in seeking to align with the divine, the prayer will change. In other words, to remain as one is In the journey of faith, a person should never risk the practice of prayer. Let me say that again. To remain as one is in the journey of faith, a practice a person should never risk the practice of prayer. The most dramatic story I've ever heard was a revealing change in the prayer. Was hearing a person who was involved in the leadership of Kent State University when a student protest developed into a standoff. Over 50 years ago, where on one side of the street, a student protest developed into a standoff as students of Kent State voiced their demands for changes in the policies of the university, which, in their opinion, were suffocating the civil rights of students. On the other side of the street was the establishment, the decision makers who prided themselves in having made decisions which enabled Kent State University to grow in stature and in size. On the street were police and security forces preventing the movement of student protest. One person on the side of the establishment, distraught and disturbed, was desperate and stood unnoticed by others in prayer. He opened his eyes and saw the protesting students across the street in a different way. He moved with caution to the front of the line and moved quickly onto the well-guarded street and walked across the street to the surprise of the law enforcement officers. He was to the middle of the street before anyone noticed because all of the eyes were on the students. He knew his only chance of being shot was to be shot in the back by officers because the students were unarmed. He quickly moved into the student protest at evening time. He sat down on the grass, entered into conversation with the students, and heard their stories. That was late in the evening, but he was still there on the grass when sunrise came. His willingness to be in conversation, his willingness to listen, sparked to the possibility of the two sides meeting, and he was on the side of the student protest who met with his friends in the establishment. Changes evolved. Kent State University painfully survived. When asked why in the world he risked his life, students had been killed on the street during that protest. He simply answered, because I prayed. The prayer was changed. If he had not prayed, he never would have been the catalyst for eventual conversation and understanding, not agreement, but understanding the other. Friends, that's the promise of prayer. A person who does not want to change and grow dare not pray. For one of the promises of prayer is change. Change in attitude and change in heart. For indeed, seeking to align with the divine promises change. Recall the life of the Apostle Paul. Read his first letters and read his final letter to the church in Rome. And read in between that Paul preached, but he also prayed. And his life evolved over a decade and became the foundation of understanding of the earlier followers of Jesus. And then finally recall the prayer of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Nevertheless, God, not my will, but thine be done. Jesus was the prayer, and Jesus changed. Indeed, one of the challenging promises of prayer is change, even for Jesus and for you and me. Some questions that might be helpful in your thinking and conversation. What are your personal stories of experiencing change because you prayed? Secondly, which have been the most difficult, childish understandings of faith to give up in your own journey of faith? And finally, what is your comfort level with the understanding that prayer, seeking to align with the divine, involves inevitably growth and change? Thank you for being a part of our journey. And for the next 3 final weeks, we'll be looking at some prayers that fulfill the promises and avoid the perils of aligning with the divine. Thank you.